Hello, Modern Chinese short story students. My name is Katie Sutherland, and the two stories I'll be covering for this video project are Yiji for weeks 2 through 4, and My Kid Brother Kongxiong for weeks 6 through 10. I selected both of these stories for the same reason. I thought the choice of narration was an interesting one for both authors. Rather than get to know the title characters in first-person narration through their own voice and their own minds and their own perspectives, we get a sense of them through the people around them. In Yiji, we get to know him through the perspective of a server who warms wine, and the server comments on how other characters treat Yiji, and that reflects some Chinese values, which I'll discuss in a bit. And in My Kid Brother Kongxiong, it's similar, except she, his sister, gets to know him through his diary and shares her perspectives on their childhood in poverty with us, and how she thinks that affected their lives later on. In Yiji, everything we know about the title character comes from the reports of one of the servers in the tavern. What he reports makes you feel sorry for Yiji a little bit. The patrons will tease Yiji for being illiterate because he couldn't pass his preliminary examinations as a scholar. He also speaks in a very elevated language, which makes him unintelligible. So these two things put together, the patrons will make fun of him and tease him for being illiterate because they can't understand what he says, and if he can't pass written examinations, he must be an idiot. Coupled with his affinity for alcohol and his laziness, all these things prevent him from keeping a job for very long, so he's reduced to pilfering in order to support himself. He'll often show up in the tavern with dirty clothes, and he'll be beat up, and people they don't treat him nicely because they don't respect him. On the final page, the server seems to expect that Yiji will come back and will pay his debt to the tavern. He says that Yiji is a model customer who always paid his debt, but he did leave this final debt of 19 coppers to the tavern. The last time he came in there, both of his legs were broken and he was crawling around on his hands, which people, of course, made fun of. And it ends on such a sad note because we don't know what happened to Yiji. All we can assume is he probably died. That's what the server suggests anyway. Because Yiji, even though he always paid his debt, he didn't pay this one back. So that suggests that he probably died. In My Kid Brother Kongxiong, we learn about Kongxiong through his sister. She reads his diary after being married for a couple years. She says that at that point she's able to read it without bursting into tears, which is understandable. If your brother kills himself, it would be very hard to read his diary. What she reads about him, we get the sense that he was a very deep person in terms of feelings. Like, he felt very deeply. He talks about feeling damned and sort of losing hope in the human experience. But he's also a nihilist, which is a strange dichotomy for someone who seems so spiritual. The sister mentions a priest approaching her and saying, before her brother died, before he killed himself, the priest saw him praying fervently in a church. So we don't really know what to think about Kongxiong either. Same with Yiji. It seems like in Kongxiong, he had this perspective about living that he didn't belong with other people because he was damned, because he couldn't be saved. And he also felt that wealth spoiled a person, but poverty didn't do any favors for a person either because it made them depraved. And the sister questioned her own position in society because she started out in poverty but ended up marrying into wealth, and she questioned herself and how her brother would see her in that light. Yiji, my favorite character in Yiji. I find him fascinating from the perspective of a student because I know so little about him. after studying literature for 3 or 4 years, you get into a swing of analyzing a character or analyzing a narrator or a story. And with Kong Yiji, you don't have anything to go on except the perspectives of other characters in the story. And I find that fascinating. I don't know who Kong Yiji is. I can only guess by the little I've seen about what he's really like. I know that whenever he talks to the other patrons, he always defends himself because they just verbally attack him. The one instance I saw him be nice was to the server when he wanted to show him calligraphy. I thought that was very sweet that he wanted to share his knowledge. But the server just didn't want anything to do with him, probably for fear of being socially ostracized by the patrons, like they did with Kong Yiji. So, I find Kong Yiji fascinating for the groupthink that surrounds him. It seems like he's a very easy target, and everyone just joins in making fun of him without really understanding him. It seems like they judge him based on his failed attempts at that imperial test for the imperial court, and if they don't understand what he says in his elevated language, then they judge him not to be intelligent in the first place. He seems interesting on a behavioral level as well, for stealing and excessive drinking. So if he can't get a job, a steady job, because of all these factors, then of course his life is going to suffer. But why does he suffer? Why does he choose to do these things? That's what makes him so compelling as a character for study, and I find it fascinating that I can't pin him or figure him out. It's very, very interesting. The sister in My Kid Brother Kongxiong I found very appealing. This is for 2 reasons. The first of which is she sort of analyzes religion through her brother, and she notes his extreme periods of spiritual damnation and nihilism, and she also notes his interest in poverty and wealth. It seems like she observes this strong, polarized thought process in her brother, and she seems to apply what happened in her life as it would happen in her brother's mind. She goes from poverty to wealth. She has the same sort of religious struggle as her brother. She equates the body of Christ to the body of her brother. But she doesn't seem to have the same emotional attachment to these issues. Her brother, in the diary that she read, just poured his soul onto these pages, and he seemed to lament the human condition. She didn't seem to do that. She seemed logical to me. She seemed almost like a scientist, like she observed the world from the outside. And I think this is what enabled her to survive, unlike her brother. So I found her very interesting for that. Kong Yiji and My Kid Brother Kongxiong do represent the time periods in which they were written. In Kong Yiji, the short story mentions long-robed patrons being wealthy and short-robed patrons being common workers. They sat in different areas and they got treated differently. The wealthy patrons got better undiluted wine, whereas the workers would often get diluted wine. And Kong Yiji, even though he had long robes and he should have had the wealthy status because he didn't measure up to the standards of passing the test, he sat with the workers and he was mocked for it. He was mocked for not meeting high feudal standards. In the case of My Kid Brother Kongxiong, written during communist era China, he seemed to ponder wealth and religion a lot. Elements which communism takes out of the social structure and economic structure, sort of equalizing everybody. And my kid brother Kongxiong, it seems like both the narrator, his sister, and Kongxiong, they seem like they still have their individuality, and it's a very strong part of them, not something that a social system could beat out of them. So I'm not sure if either of these stories represent specific values, but they do reflect certain trends in thinking in the times in which they were written. The title of each short story represents the character who embodies social problems at the time they were written. In Kong Yiji's case, the environment is feudalistic. It feels feudalistic because it has this social stratosphere of this is where you are, this is what you do, this is what you're supposed to do, depending on how rich you are or where your place is in society. And Kong Yiji doesn't really fit in anywhere. He doesn't pass his exams, but he doesn't fit in with the workers. Everybody makes fun of him. No one wants to be friends with him or bond with him. He's completely ostracized. And he seems to represent a change or a shift from old order to new order, and the struggle in doing that. In My Kid Brother Kongxiong, written in communist-era China, Kongxiong, he thinks very deeply about religion and spirituality, two elements that communism does not have in its economic and political structure. It tries to remove that from its social structure as well. So the fact that Kongxiong thought about these things and ultimately killed himself over them is a pretty big deal. So for each short story, the title chooses a character who represents some kind of social struggle going on at the time. This concludes the video presentation on Kong Yiji and My Kid Brother Kongxiong. My name is Katie Sutherland, and thank you for watching.